And welcome to Stack Hunters. I'm your host, Bradley Stalder. And tonight, Dario Offstein is joining me, head of projections, head of all things when it comes to the data that you see on Player Profiler. It's such a pleasure having Dario join me. We're going to jump into some best ball rankings tonight. Dario and I have put our heads together in the best ball space to identify some players that we think that you should be targeting in these very early best ball drafts, and some players that maybe you should be avoiding at their ADP, allow them to fall to you. And definitely we're going to discuss what the first round, and in particular, that big 7 should look like for you in your fantasy drafts, your way too early 2024 best ball streets, best ball drafts. Dario, welcome to Stack Hunters.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I mean, I've been kind of following along with your stuff for as long as I can remember. So I'm ready to hunt some stacks with you.
Yeah, Dario and I, if you are new to Player Profiler, podcasted a few times this past summer when we were on Man versus Machine together. Theo Greminger was there. I think Billy may have popped in for one of those as well. So this was has been a lot of fun pairing with Dario, and we're back at it here on Stack Hunters. All of that and more right after this. So Dario, one of my roles is as head of news desk, right? And so all of the news, whether it's rumors, whether it's speculation, whether it is shady Instagram posts, all get sent my way. And one of my roles is to decide and determine and discern what is the news that Player Profiler needs to report on and what spin we should take, and consulting with many of our stars in the news desk. But we'll start with this first player that is very high in our ranks relative to the ADP on Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code Underworld, get 100% deposit match up to $100. Brandon Aiyuk was just in some Instagram turmoil where one of his friends hinted that he would not return to San Francisco after only 3 receptions in the Super Bowl. There were some interviews after the Super Bowl where Aiyuk was not completely sold on returning either. Like, that was definitely the vibe we were getting. We are higher than consensus on Brandon Aiyuk. I think we're about almost a half round higher versus ADP in our rankings. I am very optimistic about Brandon Aiyuk. Definitely a 25+% target share type of player. An alpha X, plays on the outside. And if he goes somewhere else on even an average offense or above average offense, we could see a massive season. Is that what we're banking on, or are there other perspectives and reasons why we are higher than ADP on Brandon Aiyuk?
I have a hard time seeing San Francisco letting him out. He's got his 5th-year option to play still this upcoming season. I just, had to go and look that up. So he's pretty locked in. He was a first-round pick, got that 5th-year option signed. I mean, he's going to be making pretty much more money than he's made in all his other years in the NFL combined on the 5th-year option. I think this is one of those news items that you just kind of we're gonna forget about a month from now. So I'm inclined to draft him on the assumption that he will still be in San Francisco and he will still be absolutely feasting with Brock Purdy as his quarterback like he did in 2023. I mean, we saw him put up just absolutely crazy efficiency metrics. His yards per route run, targets per route run were all there. And last year, the thing to keep in mind is Kittle, Aiyuk, Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey all stayed healthy. Those 4, Deebo Samuel missed maybe 3 or 4 games. So between those 4, between those 4 guys to stay healthy for, what is that? 17 times 4, back of the napkin, 68. right? Uh, Only 4 games missed out of those 68 possible games between those 4 guys. That's probably not likely to repeat itself, I would say. And Brandon Aiyuk, whenever any one of those other 3 is missing, his ceiling just elevates to another level. So between that, we know he's an absolute stud. And Brock Purdy being willing to throw that deep ball to him a little more than Jimmy Garoppolo ever was is very, very nice.
Yeah, we're here for the Brandon Aiyuk. In my first 2024 early best ball draft on the FFPC, I drafted Brandon Aiyuk along with Theo Greminger in round number 2. And I felt really good about back end of round 2 for Brandon Aiyuk. We want to be higher on Aiyuk because, as you mentioned, San Francisco stayed healthy in the game where Deebo Samuel was out. We saw Brandon Aiyuk and George Kittle feast. It is a condensed target share to just those guys when one of the others miss, and they're very efficient when it comes to playing in this San Francisco Kyle Shanahan offense. So we want to be in on Brandon Aiyuk. Also, Brock Purdy is someone that is going a little bit later, not too hard to stack with. So
yeah, I mean, Brock Purdy's ADP is 91, so you're getting him in, what is that, like the 8th round, pretty much, without having to reach. You'll probably get some drafts where he's falling to the 9th. And once you get to that point, like if you're trying to stack, for example, the Lamar Jacksons, the Josh Allens of the world, you need to worry about like what exact position you have in the draft in order for that stack to even have a reasonable chance of coming together. But we're basically telling you, as long as you have any pick in the latter half of the second, you should be looking at Brandon Aiyuk, and stacking Brock Purdy is no problem in that 8th round.
Yeah, Brandon Aiyuk in 2023 had a 9.39 best ball value rating, which was wide receiver 17, and that's inclusive of some of the the others that it just in that similar tier. So we saw him really hit some spike weeks this season, and I think with Brock Purdy as the quarterback, we were able to see him win on the outside. That was the difference between him and Purdy and Garoppolo. Garoppolo was not able to get the ball to the sidelines as easily. And he struggled with accuracy from time to time. I mean, Billy, one of the reasons why Billy was losing his hair for many months when Garoppolo was the quarterback was because of the inaccuracies and unwillingness to get the ball to the likes of Brandon Aiyuk. So I think that this is a player that we want to be targeting in the back end of the second, maybe early third of our drafts. So
yeah, his ADOT, air yards share, yards per target, yards per reception, all of those spiked last year. You mentioned the best ball value rating. I mean, he was 123 best ball points added per our metrics. So firmly established himself in that top tier of wide receivers for sure.
Great. Well, we're very in on Brandon Aiyuk for 2024. We're also in on a running back from the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's Travis Etienne. Etienne, we have 5 spots above ADP. He's being drafted, it looks like, at 25th over, at like 30th overall. So mid 3rd round, we put him at the 2-3 turn, or even in the 2nd round. And Travis Etienne was a player that he paid off. Like, he paid off his ADP, and the shift that we saw from 2022 to 2023 had to do with the pass catching, right? He was involved more in the passing game, and that's even with Calvin Ridley being added to this offense and Evan Ingram leading all tight ends and targets. So for Travis Etienne to also be a touchdown maker and get targets out of the backfield, I think he's a little undervalued here, and that's what's indicated in our best ball rankings here at PlayerProfiler.com. Brandon Aiyuk this past season, or I'm not Brandon Aiyuk. Now we're on to Travis Etienne, was the 14th overall player in terms of best ball value. So I think for getting him in the third round, that's a nice little value. And the Jaguars offense really sputtered near the end. I think a more consistent offense is in the works for the Jaguars, and that means more goal line work, better touches for Etienne. Give us a little bit more based on this third round ADP.
Yeah, I'm absolutely there with you. I remember you and I were sitting down running through V1 of these best ball rankings, and it was very clear. We were like, doesn't ETN seem like he should be going in like the late second round, maybe even the mid second? Like, this is a guy who, when redraft rolls around and like all those sites have their default ADPs, I'm sure that Travis Etienne will be like 16th overall or something like that. Maybe that point will fade him, but he delivered in a strong way. Went from 12 points per game. Not really his rookie year because of the injury, but his first year playing in 2022, 12.1 PPR points a game, up to 16.6 this last year. Got a little bit luckier in the red zone, but that role is probably not going to go anywhere for him. And I'm right there with you. I mean, this is just a solid value at the current moment in drafts. I think the reason you're seeing a lot of these running backs get faded is because you can fall behind big time at the wide receiver position fast in these underdog drafts. But you have to keep in mind, last season, we saw zero RB absolutely crush, but zero RB is not always the optimal strategy every year. I think out of the 4 years that Underdog has been the preeminent platform, I think those first 3 years, the teams that took it all home were hero RB teams. So if you can get a strong anchor running back in that first or second round, maybe it's ETN right at that 2-3 turn, I think you're still setting yourself up nicely to tally a lot of points. And especially with these earlier off-season drafts, you're talking about just security in terms of points. And a lot of these teams, a lot of these players are going to have big shifts in their valuation. Travis Etienne does not shape up to be one of those guys as a starting running back on a above average offense in terms of pace of play, in terms of targets to the running back. So he's very much kind of a locked in value for us at the moment.
Yeah, this is a player who is currently going around like the run. Well, he's our running back 9, and he has still room to pay off. One of the tough things about running back is that if they get injured, there's not really room to pay off. And so you could see Travis Etienne finishing as the running back 5, running back 6, running back 7, and paying off that ADP. Whereas it's much harder for a player like Jonathan Taylor, who is the RB5 in our rankings. Like, there's just not a lot of room for error. And given the volume that we anticipate from Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby did not do much in terms of being
Tank Bigsby. All he did was prove he's never going to make it to the NFL.
It was so sad. I drafted too much Tank Bigsby last year as a handcuff, and Etienne did not suffer, significant injuries that lasted much of the season at all. And so, while injuries happen from time to time, we know that happened for Christian McCaffrey when we were talking about San Francisco earlier in the program. Travis Etienne is a player that the Jaguars are going to be smart about. They've invested first round draft capital in him. Yes, it was Urban Meyer, but look, he was a player that they've invested significant sponsorship in. And when it comes to what he can provide for you is not only volume and trusted volume like a Saquon Barkley, which is why we have Barkley and Etienne back to back in the rankings. Like, they are volume driven back end RB1s who in the right scenario can get into that top 5 and still pay off. So Travis Etienne, we are above ADP on. All right. So before we move on, we have a word about our Dynasty Dominator app. It's a great app. Make sure you guys are downloading it. And we've got a word from Matt Kelly about how awesome it is.
Now, I know many of you are looking for a secret weapon for your Dynasty League, and I have it. It's called the Dynasty Dominator app. You go to the App Store, go to Google Play. It's right there. It's $5 to download, and then every year it's $5 to load the next incoming class of rookies. You can add Superflex, add tight end premium. It's incredible. because it allows you to look up players. It allows you to vote on whether a player is a buy, hold, or sell, and then see the market sentiment on that player. And you can compare their lifetime value rating from PlayerProfiler to their Dynasty ADP at the FFPC, all in the price lookup tool. And beyond that, we have a trade analyzer, so you'll never lose another Dynasty trade again. And in our settings, you can set this is a win now team, this is a rebuilding team, and then we let you compare players. Look at their metrics side by side, prospect metrics, NFL metrics. It's all there. It's $5 in the App Store. There's some add-ons for Superflex and to buy the upcoming rookie class. Every year, you're going to spend $5 on this thing, and it's going to be well worth it.
That's right. It is well worth it. It's a great tool to have too when you're just trying to create this dynasty sense. You don't necessarily, like, I don't have all of the players memorized, but also I don't use it like religiously, but it is something to just remind myself of this sense of where the players are as like a litmus test of, okay, is this the direction I want to go? Here are the general like values. Maybe where is there an edge in my evaluation versus what maybe the market or even what, Dario and the team have set up from the player profiler side. So it's definitely a valuable tool. Make sure you guys are downloading it and reloading every year.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically got all you could need to dominate your dynasty leagues. That's why we call it that.
All right. Well, we will move on to a player. We've been so optimistic to start Stack Hunters, Dario. We've been praising Brandon Aiyuk and Travis Etienne. We've got to talk about a player that we're a little bit lower on this year, and that is Davante Adams. We are about a half round below ADP on Davante Adams. Adams this past year was still useful for fantasy in terms of best ball value rating. But he was the 31st overall player in terms of best ball value rating, but he fell behind Amari Cooper, Tank Dell, Jamar Chase. Actually, Jamar, pretty good, but like DJ Moore as well was significantly higher. Nico Collins was higher than Davante Adams. And I think there are a few factors that played for Davante, and Dario, maybe you can also chime in too when, back me up on these, but Davante Adams, I think we face a few things. One is the age cliff. He's past, he's going to be 32, I think, here coming up shortly. We also have quarterback concerns. We don't think it's going to be Aiden O'Connell. And when it was Aiden O'Connell this past season, we saw a lot of inconsistency. And then the third issue that I'm running into is, let's say he's not on the Raiders in 2024, which is a non-zero chance. There's been some chatter about Aaron Rodgers trying to recruit Davante Adams to the New York Jets. And I think that would be good for Adams from a morale standpoint. I think it would be bad for Adams from a fantasy standpoint when you're competing with Garrett Wilson, who is an up-and-coming player. He's getting drafted at the 1-2 turn, and I think that would be bad for Davante Adams. So there are a few factors that play your paths of failure for Davante, and I haven't drafted almost any Davante in any of the dozens of early 2024 best ball drafts so far. I just see too many paths for failure. What is your take on Davante Adams as we're entering the 2024 season?
I think it's tough because you don't want to bet against someone with that much talent. He's probably still the best route runner in the league. But like you said, the Raiders are cooked at the quarterback position. No one knows what they're going to try to do this offseason. And I'm with you that getting traded to the Jets wouldn't necessarily improve his outlook or his ceiling from a fantasy perspective. So, like, there's just some guys behind him that we'd rather have at the moment. I mean, Tank Dell, Michael Pittman, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs are all going behind Davante Adams in ADP right now. And I think that there's a strong case for each of those guys to be going ahead of him. That's why we have him ranked that way among wide receivers. And again, it's still the third round of your fantasy drafts. We're not saying Davante Adams is bad, but I think that it's just a little bit tough to see that path to success. Like you said, that path to paying off that ADP is a little thinner. I mean, I believe that makes him wide receiver 15 in ADP, and he finished as wide receiver 15 in points per game last year. That's full PPR, maybe it was a little lower in half, which is the underdog setting. But he's
wide receiver 19 in our rankings right now. And he's going 24th overall. So this is, this is a player that, yes, you're getting wide receiver steamed up in the best ball streets on Underdog, but this is a player we have to have concerns, that there's pathways for him to not pay off, and there's nicer players that, yes, we've seen some massive ceiling from Davante Adams, but I think over the last 2 seasons we've also seen a much scarier floor. And like at least Stephon Diggs is going to get you 8 to 10 points on his bad days in full PPR. Davante Adams, he may not goose egg, but 2 for 30 is kind of what we're looking at. And with the uncertainty of quarterback, I don't see how it gets any better. So the best days for Davante Adams are behind him. Is obviously wherever you're drafting, whether it's FFPC, I think he can be, had a little easier in those types of drafts where there's tight end premium and there's other players that can go into that type of round. But I'm not looking to say Davante Adams is a target. Just too many questions, too much uncertainty, and more pathways to failure than I'd like.
Yeah, I'm with you there. As sad as it is to see, someone who absolutely dominated the position in fantasy for really a 5-year stretch start to kind of dwindle in terms of that standing, but that's Father Time.
It's unbeatable. Father Time is unbeatable. We've got another lens that we want to take a look at. We're going to, of course, talk about some player takes moving forward, but when we're starting our fantasy drafts, we're going to look not just in the first round, but we're going to adjust our telescopes. We're going to adjust the microscopes and take a look that there is a clear top 7. I think that it's clearly a top 7, and that any of the other players are more player takey shots than anything. If you run into these in the best ball streets, if another player outside of these top 7 enter into the 7, I think these aren't going to move very much. And the top players are consensus McCaffrey is number 1. We've seen some Tyreek Hill go 1, but Hill is usually going, second or third. CD Lamb is also going second or third here. Jefferson, Chase, Breece Hall, and Amon-Ra St. Brown round out those top 7. We have the McCaffrey, Hill, Lamb, Chase, Jefferson, Hall, St. Brown. I don't think there's much haggling about who needs to be in the top 7, but Dario, you and I haggled about, is it Tyreek Hill? Is it CD Lamb? Is it Chase? Is it Jefferson? And even if there's like a tier within these where, Amon-Ra St. Brown feels like he is the tier above all of the others, but he is not necessarily in the Hill, Lamb, Chase, Jefferson tier as well. So, this has been like, I haggled with Hill, Lamb. You messed around with it too. I think we ultimately settled on Hill and then Lamb, but they were within decimal points. 0.02 best ball value rating compared to each other. So extremely close, neck and neck. I think the difference here is twofold. One is their quarterback. Dak is, I think, a superior quarterback, and 2 is the age cliff. Tyreek Hill, much older than CD Lamb, but it's still Hill over Lamb for now in these 2024 best ball streets. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit more too.
Yeah, I mean, CD Lamb's currently going 2 in ADP, 2.5 right now. Tyreek 3.3, Jefferson 3.8. Those are a really tight cluster. I probably am going to end up with the least CeeDee Lamb out of those three guys that are going right behind McCaffrey. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of Cowboys hate flowing through me subconsciously, but I don't think he's as talented as Jefferson or Hill. I mean, I think that we saw what'll ultimately be Dak's best season in his career last season. I don't trust Mike McCarthy to stay as pass heavy as they became down the stretch last year. So I think we see CeeDee Lamb come back closer to what we've seen for him over the course of his career. And Justin Jefferson over the course of his career has simply never let us down. So I think I'm it's might be a little bit of a hot take, I guess, in the February best ball streets, but I'm comfortable taking Jefferson as high as 2 overall. And I think Tyreek Hill, you mentioned the best ball value rating, comparing those guys. Only reason Tyreek Hill isn't blowing CeeDee Lamb out of the water is that late season injury. I'm sure that up to that point, Tyreek Hill was ahead, and then he just kind of sputtered those last 4 or 5 games. Still finished, leading the league in yards. So I don't think.
And then Lamb did finish with an explosive game at the end of the season too in the fantasy playoffs. So, the weight of those, the best ball value rating doesn't weigh the playoff games more heavily because of just random variance, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Tyreek Hill, I think it was the game against Tennessee, week 14, that he got banged up. And if you look at his 12 games prior to that, he was outside the top 5 receivers in fantasy 3 out of 12 weeks. Just absolutely ridiculous production. I don't think that Mike McDaniel is going to change the offense all that drastically, keep him as the centerpiece. Like you mentioned the age cliff, but I think someone with a skill set like Tyreek's is just so unique. As long as he still has that half a step on everyone else in the league, I still think he's going to be doing just fine for us in fantasy. So I like his, this is a long way of saying you can't really go wrong with any of those top 7. But I mean, I'm probably slightly fading CeeDee Lamb at that ADP. Jamar Chase, we expect a rebound with Joe Burrow healthy, hopefully. I mean, last offseason and just everything we saw with the Bengals over the entire season was a lower floor than, frankly, anyone imagined for that team. And then I also don't mind. I mean, it's between Breece Hall and Amon-Ra St. Brown rounding out that top 7. I just love both those guys. Like if I land if I draw pick 6 or pick 7 in my draft, I'm like, all right, cool. I've got one of these 2 guys that I absolutely love. So you can't really go wrong there.
No, you can't really go wrong. And I think Jefferson, to your point, being drafted at the 102, I think is totally fine. He was a player that absolutely crushed at the beginning of the season and the end of the season with the injury smack dab in the middle. But he was also able to produce with the backup quarterbacks, even without Kirk Cousins at the end of the season. Our concern, though, the reason why he's at 5, and we have to be a little nitpicky, is there is a wide range of outcomes of how the Vikings are going to address the quarterback position. Kirk Cousins is a free agent. He's coming off the Achilles injury. Do they draft someone? Do they bring back Cousins? Is Cousins healthy by the time the season starts? That's a major question. Do they bring in a free agent? There's a lot of possibilities for how Minnesota is going to attack it, but I don't think there's any reason for Justin Jefferson to fall outside of the top 5, really, given his proven production at whoever steps behind center for the Vikings. So that ties up the big 7. We're also going to move down the rankings a little bit, but talk about a pair of teammates that are going very close in the ADP streets, and that is the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. They are both going very close to each other. I believe at the end of that, the 4-5 turn my updated best ball rankings are updated best ball ADP is there. It looks like they are, Mark Andrews at about 54, Zay Flowers at about 46. So that you're able to get both of them pretty easily. And then you're also, Lamar Jackson is at 38. So you're probably going to have to take Jackson and then one of those two. You're probably not going to be able to get Jackson and both of them unless one of them falls significantly. I've tried a few times an Underdog, and so far it just hasn't hit. But if you are picking between taking Zay Flowers usually as your second or third wide receiver in this draft, or taking Mark Andrews as your first tight end, who are you going to take, Dario? Let's say you've drafted Lamar Jackson in Underdog. Are you taking Andrews, the tight end, or are you taking his number one receiver in Zay Flowers?
Well, I'm personally taking Andrews, and this is how we have it in our rankings. I think that Andrews, has more chance to provide you that separation within his position than Zay Flowers does. And then, speaking of concerning player news, I'm surprised that Zay Flowers' ADP hasn't really taken a hit since that report surfaced about a domestic violence issue in Baltimore. I think it was sometime last week.
He's being investigated right now. There are no charges at this point.
Right. Which, we know the NFL is very slow moving on some of these things. Like, it could be very well a 2025 suspension if anything comes to light. But I think that there's a lot of indicators that, when they were both on the field together, Mark Andrews was drawing more targets. Zay Flowers, he looked really good in a few games, but he also there were some benchmarks that you look at for rookie wide receivers where he was kind of just good, not great. Like, I think I'm pulling up his route run, his per route stats right now, but his yards per route run 1.67. You really want to see a rookie clear 2 to be kind of vaulted into this position that he's being vaulted into right now. His targets per route run, only 21%. So you really want to see that closer to 28-ish, ideally upwards of 25 is kind of, what I consider the benchmark for, like, are you good at ball? And again, rookies can come in a little bit below that and still grow in their role. I think the biggest upside case for either of these guys and just the Ravens passing game as a whole is that their defense cannot possibly be as good as it was last year, and they're going to be in closer games. They're going to be in games where they have to throw the ball more. But I think that Andrews, with his track record with Lamar Jackson and the ability to separate among the tight ends, is more interesting there to me. Just some other receivers in this territory, Drake London's going slightly ahead of Zay Flowers. I certainly prefer him. Amari Cooper is right around that same range. The Browns are kind of another mess unto themselves. I think Jordan Addison is there in the 5th round. I think Rome Odunze is going to be really interesting. Jaden Reed is another guy who kind of flashed in spurts as a rookie. And I think we have him slightly behind Flowers. But that's another guy that I think is really exciting. So it's just an interesting tier there at wide receiver, whereas Mark Andrews very much has the potential to have a tight end 1 overall season. And I think that's a lot more valuable at that point in your draft. It also, it's going to depend on the context of the rest of that team you've drafted. If you have a running back and Lamar in those first 4 rounds, you probably should take Zay Flowers, because if you have a running back, a receiver, a tight end within your first 5 rounds, then you're going to be really behind the 8 ball at wide receiver. So I think it depends on the context of the rest of that team that you're drafting up to that point. And then you're going to want to just follow that, obviously get a little bit of exposure to both, but in a vacuum, one draft, we're saying take Andrews.
Yeah, Andrews is the pick for me as well. They were virtually neck and neck in terms of best ball value rating, and you also have to understand Andrews was dealing with injuries for part of part of the season, and even when he played in the playoff game, he was coming back from missing a significant amount of days, so a significant amount of weeks, and quickly turning it around. So we are here for Mark Andrews being the pick here, especially stacking with Lamar. You mentioned the positional differentiation, and Zay Flowers, was not great. You mentioned the yards per route run, but also from the best ball value rating, he was, where was he? Like, is 65th overall in terms of best ball value rating last year. That was behind the likes of Adam Thielen. That was behind Jacoby Myers, Jordan Addison, DeAndre Hopkins. Like,
Jacoby
even with
Myers.
yeah, like as a complete aside, I will always be pro Jacoby Myers, and he is the new Tyler Lockett.
I'm with you. Yeah, 100%.
Jacoby Myers is the new Tyler Lockett. He will be perpetually undervalued. He'll always be viewed as the wide receiver 2 on his team until Davante Adams gets traded. But he is the player that we saw now have bigger spike weeks on the Vegas Raiders, and especially in the games where Davante Adams disappeared. Imagine if Davante Adams is actually gone from the Raiders. Darren Waller was gone. Yes, give me all of the Jacoby Myers at his ADP. Right now, Jacoby Myers is going as the wide receiver. Wow, I'm scrolling way down here, all the way to, man, I think I even lost him. It was that bad. Jacoby Myers is going as wide receiver. Am I reading
46.
that right? 46. Holy buckets. Yeah. So Jacoby Myers, a very easy pathway to pay that off. Whereas Zay Flowers, it's going to be much more difficult for Zay Flowers to pay off wide receiver 29, where he has really no room for error. He's got to be a top 24 wide receiver on a team that doesn't throw the ball a ton. And when they do, Andrews is the first read on the offense. So, yeah, give us some Mark Andrews in the Zay Flowers Mark Andrews debate, even with the positional value of 3. You got to start 3 wide receivers, but Andrews can access some ceilings that other tight ends can't. So give us a Mark Andrews.
100%.
All right, we've got a couple other people in the chat saying Mandrew's going to be overlooked for sure if he's healthy. I agree. There has been some criticism, though, Dario, about Andrews. When I put out my initial best ball rankings, I had Andrews pretty high. And some of the criticism I received was, how can you rank a piece of glass so high in your fantasy rankings? and I replied back, he's obviously not made of glass. He is a Raven for sure. But the reality is Andrews can give you access to ceilings that others can't. And then we also saw the Isaiah Likely tight end pay off significantly as well. So you get Andrews and you get Likely and maybe one other tight end, and you've got it on lockdown, because Likely was also crushing it from a best ball perspective near the end of the season, when I don't know if something wasn't right at the beginning with Likely when he took over for Andrews, or Andrews had to miss a couple games. But when Likely really looked like the second best receiving option on the Baltimore Ravens near the end of the season.
I'm very curious where the piece of glass takes are coming in from, because I mean, before last season, Mark Andrews had missed 2 games in his career, according to our injury tracking. So I think people overreacting to one injury in one season is the peak buy low type of situation. I mean, he averaged more points per game last year than he did in 2022 across more games. And he was the number 3 tight end that season. This year, the tight end position just simply did a little better. I mean, he was the number 5 tight end, even though he went up in points per game. I think we're going to see that stay the case a little bit. The tight end market is getting competitive with, we saw the sort of youth movement at the tight end position, but Man, I don't know if someone's going to be calling Mark Andrews injury prone, and that's why his ADP is where it is. I will gladly be overweight on him this season.
I will also be overweight on him this season. I love adding him as one of the tight ends I've been clicking so consistently in the early rounds, given the value that we're seeing. And give me him over a Trey McBride. I know that's a little bit of a people would not like that take, but give me Mark Andrews over Trey McBride. There's also a couple people in the chat. Shout out to Tyler. Will not stop taking Drake London. The Ram system's always had a wide receiver get littered with targets. I'm here for Drake London. He's not in the show sheet, but he's a player that I've been pretty easily clicking in that, like,
Did I change your mind there? I remember we were talking about the rankings 2 weeks ago, and you were like, "Oh man, Drake London, you had some trepidation there. It's changing the tune."
Maybe I'm changing my tune on Drake London now that I'm staring at him in the best ball streets. I'm getting my feet wet. I am, in the words of Evan Silva, I'm capitulating on Drake London. Shout out to Silva, the man, the myth, the legend. But Drake London's going as wide receiver 27. And given his yards per route run, given his target share, I think, well, when we were talking about him, I don't think Raheem Morris was hired as the coach at that time, was he?
Maybe not.
Yeah,
Perhaps
and that may have
yet.
been the thing. I think that was the shift for me.
I think it was the official. It was Zach Robinson definitely wasn't the OC yet. I think probably It was rumored that Morris would bring him along from the Rams. That was confirmed, I think, sometime in the last 2 weeks since our early discussions.
Yes. So I think that I'm capitulating, Dario. So you can chalk that one up in the W column for Dario. Make sure you guys are following Dario on the Twitter machine and also checking out all of the best ball rankings we have on Player Profiler. If you have a subscription, all you have to do is go to the player rankings and then click on the Underdog rankings. We have them listed there. And you can see we have the rankings. We also have the fantasy points per game in 2023, the best ball points added in 2023, their ADP, I think, for 2024. And if there's any other staff picks that we need to, that are my guys here on the staff, you can also see that in our player rankings. The best part is if you have a subscription to playerprofiler.com, you can just download these rankings and then upload them to Underdog so you can draft with them. And if you miss a pick, guess what? You've got our rankings to back you up right there. So, and then there are some states that require you to have rankings uploaded or made. And we're here to help you out in Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you're using the promo code Underworld for 100% deposit match up to $100. Before we get into the last couple players on our show sheet, Flowosaurus jumps in and says, Lockett, a guy who has never finished worse than wide receiver 32, is now being drafted as wide receiver 64. It's wide receiver 54 on Underdog right now, as far as maybe I need to refresh it.
Yeah, I'm seeing 54 as well. Could have been a typo there from Flowosaurus.
That's okay, but still pretty late.
He makes a great point nonetheless.
The best ball value rating for Tyler Lockett historically has been very, very good. Typically, if you are getting a best ball value rating of at least 6, you're doing pretty well, and you're not going to dip below 4 almost ever. So last in 2023, he did have a 5.3 best ball value rating, but in 2022, a 7.1. Over the last 3 years, from 2022 to 2020, a 7.23. So this is a player who's very much been in that 5 to 7 range pretty much his entire career, and we've liked that. He is getting, we talked about age cliff, about Tyreek Hill, and slowing down first non-1,000-yard season in what seems to be forever for Tyler Lockett. But I think if he lands on somewhere else, he can be, a Golden Tate type. It may be obviously a different stature, but he can play out of the slot. He can move around. He can win, whether it's staying in Seattle or moving on. But Tyler Lockett is a player that I think, taking late shots on a spike week king, I think he has an interesting pathway and does not have as high of a risk, to busting as his ADP indicates.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those players like you want to mix in floor and ceiling. If you're drafting 4 rookie wide receivers on your early best ball teams, a Tyler Lockett's going to be real nice to kind of help stabilize that positional floor week to week. And he's still going to, I think he's always going to be a spike week player. I mean, he's going to have, last season, you're talking about games, 3 games of 20 plus fantasy points. Not every guy who is kind of being drafted in that range has the potential to give you that type of upside in a given week. But I mean, I think would you say that's enough for our Lockett tangent? Want to talk about our next guy?
We will be locked into our next player, and that is Optimism about David Montgomery. Right now, David Montgomery, 73rd overall on Underdog Fantasy. He's going as the running back 20. And looking at the players ahead of him, it just makes sense that we want to be a little bit higher on David Montgomery. He's going behind Nick Chubb, behind Tazi Spears, behind Aaron Jones. I do like Aaron Jones a lot for what it's worth.
And we do like Tajay Spears as well.
We do like Spears. But Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, like these are the crusty old veteran running backs. But David Montgomery, nothing's going to change for him. That's the reality. And so getting him at running back 20 when he was the 28th overall player in terms of best ball value rating last year, he finished with 10.2. And I was talking earlier about 4 to 6 is not too bad, but getting a 10 and that late, even if he falls to 4, 5, 6 best ball value rating, that's very valuable. For what you're getting at the running back 20 spot. The only concern we ever have for these types of players is the positional fear that he would get injured. But that's positional fear. That's structural fear. It is not afraid of what David Montgomery, because we saw Monty and Jahmyr Gibbs coexist in this Lions offense.
And he's being drafted in that range that you actually want to be targeting running backs. I mean, his ADP is 5 or 6 rounds below his teammate Jahmyr Gibbs, who, last time I checked, the Lions gave Montgomery more carries in their NFC Championship game. I think, am I saying that's 100% guaranteed to continue? Not necessarily, but you don't need it to in order for him to pay off that ADP. I mean, he was running back 17 overall, and he missed a couple of games due to concussions. I guess 1 concussion, I should say. So I don't see how David Montgomery is going to... it's really hard to see a path to failure for him while healthy behind this offensive line. I think maybe they integrate Jahmyr Gibbs more into the rushing attack this upcoming season, but they paid David Montgomery good money last offseason. He's not going anywhere. And the Lions offensive line, the Lions running game are just things we want to be invested in. And I mean, you talk about positional injury risk. He's a guy with absolutely nuclear contingent upside should anything happen to Jahmyr Gibbs.
And that's really what we saw ultimately when Gibbs was out for that little bit of time throughout the season. It was Monty was just an absolute monster. So not only is it speculative theoretical upside, we've actually seen it come to fruition in the season. So we want to be very much smashing the David Montgomery draft button. And that's another reason why you kind of do want to be in the 0 RB streets. Or a hero RB streets.
I mean, drafting
0 or 1 in the early rounds, and then just smashing the Aaron Jones, smashing the David Montgomerys of the world that are in that that 65 to 75 overall. And then there's a few players later that I'm shocked that they're this low, but that's for another podcast. Dario.
Anytime you can get Montgomery in that 7th round as your RB2 is just like chef's kiss for a best ball draft. And there's a couple running. I mean, I know he's not on our show sheet here, but in this same range, I mean, we talked about Raheem Mostert when we were making these rankings.
Yes.
And I mean, if you just take everything we just said about David Montgomery and square that, like crank it up to 11, that's pretty much the case for Raheem Mostert in 2024. I had to double check whether he's still under contract with the Dolphins, and he is, like, because I was trying to think of like why people would be fading him this hard. I think that, you know, I saw on the Twitter streets, people were speculating where his 2024 ADP would open up. And like, I think most people would have told you he's going to be like a typical dead zone back in the 4th or 5th round, just coming off of the production he had last season. And instead, we're seeing him at an ADP of almost 90 overall. You can get him comfortably in the 8th round of your drafts. And did we already forget that he scored, was it 20 touchdowns last year? Like, I mean, yeah, sure, he's been injury prone, but I'll take a guy with that just scored 20 touchdowns in the 8th round. Yeah, thank you.
And his ADP has even fallen since we've looked at this, and it continues to like bizarrely fall. He's under contract. Davante Adams is under contract, and Adams, we've talked about his size before, that he's just not built to handle 20 plus carries. And this Miami Dolphins offense under Mike McDaniel has shown time and again that they are willing to have multiple backs get double-digit touches, and double-digit touches for Miami Dolphins running backs equals fantasy points, especially for the speedsters like Achane and Mostert. Crazy saying that Mostert's still a speedster, but he is, even despite the fact that he is, you know, way past the age cliff and has suffered multiple injuries, soft tissue, blah, blah, blah. But we want to be in on Raheem Mostert, David Montgomery. One other aside before we finish off with our last two players is Tony Pollard. And Pollard is going right now as the running back 23, 78th overall. And he was, shout out to Andrew Erickson for this research out of Fantasy Pros, but you can verify it on PFF. Tony Pollard was the number 1 PFF graded rushing running back from weeks 11 onward. So for the second half of the season, once he was fully recovered from that fibula injury, once he finally said, you know what, I'm feeling myself. Yeah, he was. And he just fell on the wrong side of variance. And that doesn't reassure my wife, you know, when I tell her that I drafted so much Tony Pollard and it just fell on the wrong side of variance, babe, you know, like that does not make her feel good about it. But I'm here to be hurt again by Tony Pollard. And now his ADP is not at the 1-2 turn, but instead is at 78th overall. And I get it. There's contract, blah, 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 whatever. I think it makes sense for Dallas to bring him back and then add a bruiser, you know, like a Derrick Henry type. But Tony Pollard was able to coexist with Ezekiel Elliott like 2 years ago. In fact, the 2 games where Tony Pollard finished as the running back 1 and running back 2 in weekly scoring, Zeke had a combined 32 touches in those games.
It's funny because, you know, how funny would it be if they brought back Zeke again, just to do the Zeke roll all over again? I mean, we saw Pollard's yards per carry fall from 5.2 to 4 flat, just from 2022 to 2023. But like you said, his explosiveness was back after he was feeling healthy again. I think it's a very enticing narrative. And I also want to clarify, I don't know, I kind of disagree with you on the note of Achane not being able to take the workload. I just want to put it out there that me liking Mostert is by no means me fading Achane in 2024. I think he's absolutely built different, freak of nature, and he's going to continue crushing it for us in fantasy.
I am not out on Achane either, for the record, just because I am saying he's not going to get 20 carries a game. He can certainly he can certainly crush for fantasy and deserves his second round ADP for sure, because he has the pathway to pay it off because of that explosiveness, the efficiency, all of that.
On 15 touches a game, Achane could be a top 5 fantasy running back. He doesn't, I mean, and he handled a big workload at Texas A&M. That's the thing to keep in mind. I mean, he was a 200 carry, 30 reception guy in his last year of college. So, I think he could handle 20 plus touches, in which case, if somebody came from the future and told me that Achane was getting, 300 touches next season, I'd be drafting him in the first round easily. And I think that he's a very exciting player. And just because he is appealing doesn't mean that Raheem Mostert is not, and vice versa.
Agreed there. Draft all the Miami running backs. Number 7, Dario, we can't talk about anything without bringing it back to my Packers. This is a homer pick. It must be a homer pick. Dario, you come on this podcast, you realize that you see all the Robert Tonyan signed jerseys. You got the Green Bay Packers helmets up there. You've got off screen is a Bakhtiari jersey that's signed. Lazard, I think you've made fun of my Lazard.
Don't you live in Detroit?
I do. I do. Ooh. I'm a huge Packers fan, and my wife and family are not. I know, but we have to talk about it. This is best ball. These are the best ball streets. Christian Watson is extremely undervalued in the best ball streets. He's not to be trusted in the redraft streets, but we talk about a player who can access elite ceilings, and it's Christian Watson. In 2022, a 6.2 best ball value rating. Last year, even though he left multiple games early due to injuries, still a 4.7 best ball value rating. That was very close to the Jaden Reed best ball value rating, despite the fact that Christian Watson hit a floor of 12.5 fantasy points in half-point scoring at half the rate, which means that he had to make up for that best ball value rating with higher ceiling performances. And that's what he does. He is a freak athlete. He is a deep ball aficionado, and the unluckiness of the beginning of the year. Like, Jordan Love looked like arguably the worst quarterback in the NFL for the first few games of the season. He just was missing deep balls. And it was clear that Watson had not built the chemistry to start the season. And then right when it looked like Watson was peaking, he gets injured again. Yeah. And so like just when we saw like a huge spike week from Watson, he's down again. And so there's nothing to argue about Christian Watson except for the fact that he gets injured. But guess what? The Packers have fired just about every single other coach except for their head coach. And they are bringing in, especially in a new strength and conditioning coach. And Christian Watson himself is doing a lot of reflection about how he is getting prepared for the season because he's dealt with these soft tissue issues over the first 2 seasons. I think his value is one that we should not be ignoring. And at wide receiver 42, it's very easy to see a pathway. That's like his floor in terms of best ball value. Like a back end wide receiver 4 is like his floor because he's going to offer you massive spike weeks that are irreplaceable at 82nd overall in ADP. We want to be taking him much earlier than that.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, the big reason that I think we have him this high, I remember kind of the discourse you and I had, and it kind of came down to like Christian Watson or George Pickens head to head. And we both liked Christian Watson better. I think George Pickens is going casual round and a half earlier in ADP. So I think one of those guys has a quarterback in 2024. The other one doesn't. One of those guys has Arthur Smith as his offensive play caller in 2024. The other one doesn't. So I think that's kind of the biggest move or the biggest comparison head to head that spurred us to vault Christian Watson in these rankings.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with my Green Bay Packers bias. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. I just want
Zero. I wouldn't allow it.
It's not that I bullied, bullied Dario into making sure that we talked about a Green Bay Packers player on our podcast. The last player, though, is one that if Theo Greminger is listening or watching, he needs to shut his ears. He needs to close his ears. He needs to put on, cover it up, put in the plugs. It's that Dalton Kincaid. We are about a half round below on Dalton Kincaid. Dawson Knox is under contract for 2024. And that is a concern for Dalton Kincaid because in the 11 games with Dawson Knox, this is data from Jared Smola of Draft Sharks. Shout out to him because Smola's crushing it. Kincaid in his 11 games with Dawson Knox, less than 5 targets per game, less than a 15% target share. In the 5 games without Dawson Knox, 7.5 targets per game, nearly a 20% target share. So we see like a 30+% jump in everything across the board for Dalton Kincaid without Dawson Knox, but Dawson Knox is going to be back. And I think that looking at that tight end landscape, like Dalton Kincaid's going as the tight end 6. Why not just wait a little bit for Evan Engram or David Njoku or Jake Ferguson or Dallas Goedert? Like those guys are more likely to give you the outcome that you want. And I think the only thing that's really driving up Dalton Kincaid is the fear that you're going to lose out on the stack of Kincaid and Josh Allen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of kind of coincidental things going on with that particular stat where like Dalton Kincaid definitely came on stronger just toward the end of the season. I'd be curious to see those splits just in the games after Knox was back from injury, excluding the sort of early season lower production for Kincaid. But nonetheless, I totally agree with you that even Brock Bowers going around later in ADP, and Njoku 2 rounds later. Gosh, I don't know about you, but I'm gonna be probably duped by Kyle Pitts again this season. I'm fully ready to be hurt again by Kyle Pitts in a 10th round ADP. Or sorry, not 10th. He's like 9th, right around pick 96. So I think that Dalton Kincaid is a little rich considering the usage we saw for him. I mean, his ADOT was 6 yards flat. There's a lot of things to nitpick in the way that Bill's offense came together by the end of the season. And I think that it's a little worrisome to see Kincaid at that ADP for sure.
Yeah, it's just so rich, and you need the massive spike weeks to pay off that type of ADP for a tight end. Like the tight ends who are going above him, the Laportas, we've seen it. The Kelseys, we've seen it. McBride, Andrews, Kittle, we've seen that. It's not been as strong of evidence in the rookie year for Kincaid. We've seen it from Engram, but the concerns are that you're taking much more risk. The opportunity cost is so high for a Dalton Kincaid player who, yes, had a nice profile, good profile, first-round draft capital, pedigree, but Kincaid ultimately, did not pay off his ADP last year, and he was being drafted pretty early last year as well. And you don't find best ball teams with Dalton Kincaid, winning best ball teams oftentimes with Dalton Kincaid on them. So, sorry.
The ultimate indictment. But
well, Dario, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Stack Hunters. Make sure you guys are following Dario on the Twitter machine, checking out all of his work on PlayerProfiler.com. What other drops do you want to make, Dario, before we close out tonight?
That's the big one. I mean, we've got so much coming. I mean, the breakout finder is going to be rearing its head soon. They're going to have some combine numbers coming in for the prospects. The Player Profiler rookie guide, as always, is already in the works.
Yes.
And then we are going to have our seasonal rankings for 2024. I mean, right now we've got these best ball rankings working on our proper seasonal projections as we speak. So just a lot of exciting stuff coming down the pipe for you here from Player Profiler. And yeah, my Twitter is just at Dario Offstein. So that's where you can find me.
All right, y'all. It's been a blast. On behalf of Dario, I'm Bradley. Until next time, good luck in the best ball streets, everybody.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.